So, when you sent in the Quest for the AQSA Truth by Dr. وليد, I gotta say, it really piqued my curiosity. I mean, this isn't your run-of-the-mill history book, right?
Right.
Dr. Waleed's making some bold claims, like really bold, about the Qibla, and I'm sure our listeners know that's the direction Muslims face when they pray. But he's using some pretty unexpected sources to back it up.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how he manages to weave together all these different threads, You've got the Torah, the Bible, the Quran. He's not just talking about different religions, though. It's like he's trying to find that common ground between them.
Absolutely, and he dives right in, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't waste any time. He starts by asking readers point blank, do you really, truly believe that Mecca is the one true center of worship? And you can just feel the tension building because he's about to challenge that very idea.
Oh, absolutely. And what's really interesting is how he ties this whole idea of the Qibla to this concept of an earthly paradise, a place that he calls Bacca Jerusalem.
Bacca Jerusalem.
Yeah, he paints this picture of a land just overflowing with abundance. He even references those Quranic verses that describe this garden of refuge.
Right, like a physical paradise, not just a spiritual one.
Exactly.
And he's saying that it's rooted in a real place.
Exactly. It's not just some abstract concept, right? Yeah. It's like he's reaching back through time, all the way back to Adam, and saying, look, this idea of paradise on earth, a place where humanity first connected with the divine, this has a location.
And that location is?
Bacca Jerusalem.
Bacca Jerusalem. He doesn't buy the whole Mecca thing?
Not as the original, no. He argues that it's Bacca Jerusalem, and he points to its location. It's this crossroads of Asia, Africa, and Europe.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, right? Not just as a spiritual center, but as a hub of cultural exchange, knowledge sharing.
It's like he's saying, of course this would be chosen as a sacred site. It's geographically important, historically significant, a natural gathering place.
Exactly. And this is where his argument really takes this fascinating turn. He claims that Bacca Jerusalem, not Mecca, was the original Qibla, the direction that all the prophets from Abraham to Muhammad faced during prayer.
Okay, now that is a bold claim. I mean, to even question something as fundamental as the Qibla, you've got to have some serious evidence. So how does he support this?
Well, he brings in historical evidence. Geographical evidence. He talks about the Umayyad Caliphate. They ruled from Damascus, and they placed a huge emphasis on Jerusalem. He even criticizes other scholars a bit, saying they've kind of overlooked key pieces of evidence that could support his theory.
So he's saying, look, I'm not making this up. There's another side to this story, and it's being ignored. But it's not just about proving Mecca wrong, is it? It's bigger than that.
No, it's definitely bigger. He's trying to get us to completely rethink our understanding of these sacred spaces. Like, for example, he calls Mecca the mother of villages, but also a forbidden house.
Whoa, that's an interesting juxtaposition. What's he getting at with that?
It's like he's suggesting that Mecca represents something different from the pure monotheism that he associates with Bacca Jerusalem. He even uses Quranic verses to back this up, like 6.92. He's basically arguing that Mecca was important, but for a different group. Not the true Qibla for everyone.
Okay, so not only is it not the true Qibla, but it might represent something else entirely. We have to dive into that forbidden house thing a little bit, because that sounds ominous.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a loaded term. And he's not just talking about a physical location, right? He's using it as this metaphor for what he sees as straying from the true path.
Okay, so he's drawing a very clear distinction. You've got Mecca, the forbidden house, and then you've got Bacca Jerusalem, which he calls the sacred house. The sacred house.
Okay.
Well, what does he mean by sacred house? Is he talking about a specific building?
Well, this is where it's important to define those key terms, because he's very deliberate in how he uses them. He talks about the rock, the house, and the precinct.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So the rock is the focal point, the most sacred spot, which he identifies with the foundation stone, which is under the dome of the rock in Jerusalem.
So that rock he's talking about, that's a real physical place that people can still go and visit today.
Exactly, yeah.
What about the house and the precinct then?
So the house is that structure surrounding the rock. Think of it like a sanctuary built around the most sacred point. And then the precinct is the larger area that encompasses both the house and the rock.
So it's like a bullseye, right?
Exactly.
You've got the rock at the center, you've got the house surrounding it, and then this larger precinct that encompasses them both.
And he's saying that entire precinct is the sacred house of Bacca Jerusalem, the true Qibla. He even compares it to the sacred precinct that's described in the Quran.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture now of what he means by these terms, but there's another term he keeps using that I'm really curious about, Al-Aqsa. How does that fit into all of this?
That is a great question, and it's actually a point of a lot of debate, a lot of controversy even. Dr. وليد uses the term Al-Aqsa to refer to that entire sacred precinct of Bacca, Jerusalem.
So for him, Al-Aqsa isn't just a mosque, it's this much larger area that encompasses the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself, and even other significant sites in Jerusalem.
You got it. He's broadening the definition of Al-Aqsa to include that entire sacred precinct that he believes was the original Qibla. And this is where it gets even more intriguing, because then he describes Al-Aqsa as a celestial gate.
A celestial gate? I really don't know what that means. Are we talking about some kind of portal to another dimension here?
He doesn't get into specifics, but he seems to be suggesting that Al-Aqsa isn't just a physical place, it's this point of connection between, the earthly and the divine. This is where all the prophets from Abraham to Muhammad received their divine commandments. Wow. It's the central point in their spiritual journeys.
So it's not just about geography, it's about a spiritual reality that goes beyond physical location. And he's claiming that this spiritual reality is rooted in a very specific place, Bacca, Jerusalem. It's a lot to unpack, but it definitely makes you see these familiar terms in a whole new light.
It's about understanding those deeper layers of meaning that are embedded within these traditions. And I think that's what makes Dr. Walid's work so compelling. He's not just giving you information, he's inviting you to rethink your entire understanding of these sacred spaces and their place in history.
And he makes some pretty bold connections, too. Like, for example, he compares the treasury in Petra to a modern-day bank.
It does seem like a strange comparison at first, but when you think about it, it's actually kind of clever.
Yeah, how so?
Well, he's drawing this parallel between how, in ancient societies, they use these grand structures to store their wealth. And he's comparing it to how we do the same thing today, just in modern buildings.
So he's using this visual, and it's a surprising one, for sure, to make a point about how certain practices might have evolved over time, but those underlying principles, they stay the same.
Exactly. And then he even goes on to suggest that both the treasury in Petra and the modern bank, they represent a form of worship, in a way. He's not saying money is bad, but he's questioning whether our pursuit of wealth and material possessions, maybe it's become a replacement for that true spiritual connection.
Okay. That's a thought-provoking idea, and one that definitely resonates in today's world. But it also raises a lot of questions, like, if he's right, and Bacca, Jerusalem really is this true Qibla, the spiritual center of these Abrahamic faiths, what does that mean for us today?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's one that Dr. وليد explores in detail, and one we're going to keep unpacking as we continue our deep dive into Quest for the AQSA Truth.
It's almost like he's asking us to take a step back, and look at what we really value. Like, have we misplaced our worship in a way?
Yeah, and he ties that right back to his main argument, because he talks about those who rotate around the black cube, obviously a reference to the Kaaba in Mecca. And it's like he's saying they're stuck in this cycle of materialism, this misdirected worship.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back, does he? But it's interesting because he also seems to be critiquing those within Islam who he believes have strayed from that true path. Like when he talks about those who, and I'm quoting here, founded universities, safeguarded their books and immortalized them, but are remarkably influenced by factions among the children of Israel. That's a pretty loaded statement. What's he getting at there?
It's definitely complex, but I think what he's getting at is that even within Islam, there are those who have been influenced by what he sees as a misinterpretation of the faith. It's like these people, they might have all the knowledge, they might have the influence, but he's saying they've been swayed by interpretations that put too much emphasis on intellectual pursuits or those outward rituals rather than on that deeper spiritual understanding.
So it's this call to return to a purer form of faith, one that isn't bogged down by those outside influences, by those material distractions.
Exactly. And for him, that return is inseparable from recognizing Bacca, Jerusalem as the true Qibla. He's not just presenting a different version of history. He's offering a path back to what he believes was the original intention of these traditions.
It's a really powerful message and one that he kind of weaves throughout the entire book. Like he talks about the journeys of both Abraham and Muhammad, and he puts a lot of emphasis on their rejection of idol worship in Mecca Petra, and then they're turning towards Bacca, Jerusalem. It's like he's drawing a parallel between their individual journeys and then this collective journey that he's asking the readers to take.
And he really hammers home that idea of transformation by talking about those name changes too. Abram to Abraham, Ahmad to Muhammad. He's saying these weren't just random occurrences. They were symbolic. of that spiritual evolution, the turning away from the Qibla of delusion and towards the Qibla of light.
It's like he's saying, even these central figures in our faith, they had to go through this process of questioning, of reorienting themselves. They had to let go of those old beliefs to really embrace this new understanding.
And he uses that to challenge the reader. It's not just believe what I'm saying. He's saying, embark on your own journey of discovery.
And he brings in the story of Noah's flood, too, as this example of what happens when people hold on to those false beliefs. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic way to illustrate the consequences of ignoring what he sees as the truth.
It's a stark reminder that there are real-world consequences to holding on to beliefs that maybe aren't serving us anymore. And he ties that right back into his argument when he says that those who were lost in the flood were the ones who were connected to that mother of villages, his term for Mecca, which again reinforces his point that it represents a departure from that true path.
It's like he's saying, this has happened before, look at history. This is what happens when people refuse to let go of those outdated beliefs.
Right, and then he takes it a step further. He even connects Noah's Ark to BACCA Jerusalem.
Wow, okay. How does he swing that one?
Well, think about it. Mount Ararat, right? Where the Ark is said to have landed in the Bible. He makes this parallel to Arafat, which is that location near Mecca that's significant in Islam.
Whoa. I have to admit, I never made that connection before.
Right. And that's what's so brilliant about his approach. He's pulling from all these different scriptural traditions to support his argument. He's not just relying on one source. Yeah. It's like he's creating this more holistic understanding.
He's like a detective.
Right.
Piecing together all these clues from different sources to try and solve a mystery. And the mystery here is, where is that true Qibla? But it's bigger than just the geography of it, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is about something much, much deeper. He's asking us to really question our assumptions about history, about faith, about our place in the world, and he's doing it in a way that really makes you think, but it also kind of stirs something within you.
He's definitely challenging us to think differently about those familiar stories.
And I think that's what makes his work so important. He's not afraid to ask those tough questions, the ones that make people uncomfortable. He wants to challenge the way things have always been done. He wants to offer a new perspective on things that have been debated for centuries.
And he doesn't shy away from a little controversy either. Some of his interpretations, they're going to make people uncomfortable, especially when he starts talking about that fool mentioned in Surah al-Baqarah.
Oh yeah, now that's a bold move because he's directly challenging the way that passage is usually understood.
Because in traditional Islamic thought, that fool is someone who mocks religion, right? Disrespects those beliefs. But Dr. وليد, he comes in with a totally different take.
Right. He's not saying it's someone who's rejecting religion altogether. It's someone who might be devout, but misguided. Someone who's so caught up in the rituals and the traditions that they've missed the point.
And he connects it back to his whole Mecca argument too, right? By suggesting that those who are so focused on the Kaaba, well, they might be the fools he's talking about.
It's definitely controversial, but it's also this really powerful reminder that blind faith can be just as dangerous as outright rejection. Dr. وليد is making a case for a more critical, a more thoughtful way of approaching faith. One that's not afraid to ask questions, and to really seek a deeper understanding.
It's like he's saying, look, this is what I've found, but don't just take my word for it. Here's the evidence. Think for yourself. Come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. It's about empowering the reader, encouraging them to become active participants in their own spiritual journeys. And that's a message that speaks to people no matter what their background is, what they believe.
And it's a message that's so relevant today, don't you think? Because we're just inundated with information all the time, and it's not always easy to sort through. It's more important than ever to think critically, to be able to tell the difference between what's true and what's not.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, I think that's what Dr. وليد is calling for. This return to a more authentic, a more meaningful way of not just engaging with our faith, but with the world around us.
It's a call to action disguised as a history book.
And it's a call, I think, that a lot of people are ready to answer.
It's really something, The way Dr. وليد brings all this together, the history, the theology, he even throws in a little social commentary. It's like a recipe for a good thriller, but it's all about this quest for the true Qibla. But I have to bring us back down to earth for a second, because we can't just get lost in the history of it all. We have to talk about what this means for people today. Because if we even entertain this idea that it's BACCA Jerusalem, not Mecca, what does that do? What does that mean for how people live their lives?
Ah, there it is, the big question, right? I mean, it's one thing to think about it as a historical debate, but then you have to grapple with the impact this could have. We're talking about billions of people's faith,
right?
Their practice.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Exactly. And Dr. وليد knows this. He doesn't shy away from it at all. In fact, he ends the book with this really direct challenge, almost like he's giving the readers an assignment.
It's like he's laying it all out there, right?
Right.
Saying, okay, I've presented all the evidence. Here's my case. What are you going to do with it? You can hold on to what you've always known, or you can take this information and re-examine everything. He really leaves it in your hands.
And it makes you stop and think, because it's not just a theory anymore. It has the power to completely change your whole perspective.
And that's how you know it's a work that really makes you think. It's not just about giving information. It's about starting a conversation, making the reader question, making them think for themselves.
It's definitely given me a new lens to look at all of this through. Even if you read it and you don't agree with him completely, he still makes you think about things differently. How we interpret history, how we define these sacred places, what it even means to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
He reminds us that at the end of the day, the search for truth doesn't really end, does it? It's a journey. And sometimes to really go on that journey, you have to question everything you thought was true.
It's like he's saying, go ahead, check my work. Do the research, think about it for yourself, and then decide. That's a powerful message, no matter what your beliefs are.
Absolutely. He's putting the power back in the hands of the individual.
Well, I have to say, this has been quite a deep dive. We've gone through history, we've unpacked some really complex stuff, and I think we've both been challenged to kind of stretch our understanding a little bit.
It's been a journey. We've talked about scripture, geography, even philosophy a little bit. And this was just a taste, really. There's so much more to this book.
There really is. So if you're listening and you're as fascinated by all of this as we are, I can't recommend Dr. Khaled Walid's book enough. It's called Quest for the AQSA Truth. Go check it out, see what you think. You might just be surprised.
You might just start your own quest for truth. Thanks for coming along with us on this exploration, everyone. Keep asking those questions, keep digging deeper, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.